Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 39. I remember my 39th birthday of Jen and Millie. I'm just kidding. I don't really. Where a Gen Xer and a millennial share their strength-based perspective through which they view the world. We are your fabulous hosts.
Oh, man.
I'm stepping it up today. Allison and Tess.
Oh, man. That is quite the introduction. I feel like I have to be fabulous now.
Okay, that's the only way you can approach the age of 39.
Okay.
Is to use words like fabulous and amazing and
40s are the new
stunning
20s. Yeah.
And growth and brilliance.
Okay. Good to know.
You got a ways.
Yeah.
Don't worry. How long do you have? Let's be honest.
39, so I have 14 years.
That pains me physically. Did you see me just like... That hurt my soul. In 14 years, I will be 58.
Approaching 60. That's awesome.
We were just chatting about whether or not we should have a 50th episode celebration, so maybe we should have a 40th.
We should.
And 45th and 50th. You get
to
to
have a 39th celebration. Like, let's do it. It's
So,
fabulous.
I'm here to tell you. I'm here to tell you that once you get past age 30, birthdays are not the celebrations they used to be.
Okay, so this is maybe an interesting thing I like to explore for just a bit, because I've gotten into a rhythm with my birthday that I love, where I take a solo trip.
I know, that's good.
It's my favorite,
it's
right?
so
It's
wise.
not a celebration. It's a celebration, right? It's a trip, but it's not around other people, which I'm like, that probably has a lot to do with my strengths, right?
Right. But it's truly for you.
It is.
It's a gift to you. I think, Tess, that's really wise, because a lot of, and I don't mean to put this on a gender, but I think a lot of women especially don't start doing, it's going to be one of those days, duty. Don't start doing things for themselves until they get to their 40s and maybe even 50s. And that's tragic. So I hope you keep that birthday tradition, and I hope you continue to honor that gift to self. It's really important.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to talk about today is the most bizarre transition segue. I don't even know how we got to this, but it came up in a conversation today. There is some new trending research around the newest generation, or the youngest generation, or the generation of our mentees right now, that they're not getting driver's licenses right away, and they're not getting their cars right away. So let me first, we pride ourselves in not labeling people. And I want to be sure that we don't do that. We're not making an assumption that all of the iGen generation are saying no to driving privileges. And I also think, to some degree, there's some brilliance in this.
Yeah.
Like, they're smarter than we are,
For
and
sure.
they figured out things that consume a lot of time and consume a lot of energy, and maybe they're just a little bit smarter about their resources. So I thought we'd dive into that a little bit, because it came up in a conversation this week during a strengths training. And Terry Connell, who is Miller Teammates coordinator, has read the book iGen. She highly recommends it. I know she's told both of us. Have you read it?
No, I have not.
And I haven't read it yet either. We need to. But I think this is a good thing for our listeners to consider and ponder and ask some questions about. So I would like to ask you, Tess, when did you first start driving? First question. Second, did you see it as a privilege?
So I started driving at 15 is when you can get your permit in Minnesota, and I got my driver's test as soon as I could. You have to wait in Minnesota 6 months. You have to have your permit for 6 months before you can take your test to get your official driver's license. And so, because I was a very over-involved high schooler, I couldn't take the driver's class until the summer. And so my 6 months was 2 weeks after my 16th birthday. So I felt like I was very slow compared to all my friends. Like, all my friends would take a half day, go take their driver's test the day of their birthday. That was something to do when you were 16. Like, for me, getting your driver's license, I would actually not use the word privilege. I would use the word right.
Is that how you saw it?
That's how I saw it.
Okay.
That it just is a rite of passage, RITE, and it's an RIGHT.
Okay.
Both forms of rite. It's
Okay.
a rite of passage as a 16-year-old, and it is my right. Everybody gets to have their driver's license. Everybody does get their driver's license at 16. So that was just how it was for me. It was also definitely very freeing for me to get my driver's license then because I was overly involved. My parents definitely pushed me to get my driver's license so they didn't have to run me around everywhere. And then I was I've always been like the ringleader of most groups I'm involved in, and so I'd be the one that would drive most places. I'd be the one, and so I actually I inherited my mother's minivan, and I drove my minivan. You knew me when I drove my minivan up
Yes.
until my first real adult car purchase 2 years ago, and so I loved it because I could pile in all my friends. And your first, when you have a permit, and then your first 6 months of driving as a 16-year-old in Minnesota, you can only have one other passenger in your car at any given time because there's a ton of friends, there's all of this like distracted driving as a young person. And so when you're 16, if you get your driver's license right away when you're 16, the first 6 months you can only have like one additional non-family member passenger. So if you're running around your siblings or your parents are there, it's different, but you can only really have one additional friend, which was hard. And I definitely broke that law for sure many times because I drove a minivan. That was just like begging to have all my friends pile into it, right? But yeah, I definitely felt like it was a rite. It was a rite of passage, and then it was definitely a token of freedom, I think.
So you answered two more of my questions that I was going to ask you. One was, what was your first vehicle? And the second wasn't really for us to disclose law breaking. but did you bend any rules when it came to your vehicle? So what I was thinking is more, did your parents have rules about the vehicle or about the driving privilege or right that you...
Yep.
Did they have any rules about it that you maybe bended or...
Interesting. So my parents were not rule setters. It's kind of interesting that all of my siblings turned out as okay as we are because we didn't have chores, we didn't really have rules, we didn't have a curfew.
Yet your mom has discipline in her top 5.
She has discipline in her top 5. Her discipline is very with achiever, with relator. It's very individual centric. I wouldn't say like it's like self-centered. That's not how I would term it. It's almost like she herself has to be disciplined. And when we were growing up, but I think right around that time, as soon as we got our car, she didn't have control over our schedules, our time, where we went, where we were coming, where we were going. And so it very much turned inward. She wanted to know, she color-coded our schedule so we knew where we were, but it really didn't matter how we were getting there or anything like that.
Or if you were late.
Or if it kind of bothered her that we were late, but I was never late. I'm not a late person at all. We talked about my time anxiety, but I did want to say, okay, so this is a classic Minnesota story when it comes to driving. I took my driver's test 2 weeks after my birthday, so my birthday's right away in January, and it was in the middle of a blizzard, and school was called off that day, but I took my driver's test in the middle of it. On like black ice.
So they probably just let you pass just to get out of the situation?
No, I was very close to failing actually. It's like my only, because I practiced in my dad's car, all my driving, because he wanted me to drive with him, but I took my test in the minivan, which didn't make sense to me, and so it was so much longer, so I failed the 90-degree backing, which who actually 90-degree backs into a parking stall? I'm sorry, why is that on a test? I'm like, if I'm going to back into a parking stall, I have my fancy little camera that shows me how to do it.
Also, that kind of parking gives me a total panic attack.
Right. So I
and
hit
parallel
a cone.
is impossible.
So I hit a cone when I 90-degree backed, and so I failed that portion, but got 100% on everything else, so I was like so close to failing because I failed the 90-degree backing.
Okay, so I feel like that's a whole nother Jen and Millie topic is failure.
Oh,
we
for
have
sure.
not even come close to covering
We've
that.
not even come close to covering so many aspects of the human spirit.
Yes.
There you go.
So here's my little segue into Tess brought over from her calendar a beautiful quote from an English philosopher. Man never made any material as resilient as the human spirit. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to this is a nice little lead into our next Jen and Millie, because I think our next Jen and Millie should be around failure.
That's good.
I don't even like that word. Learning opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the growth is. So I would like for us to reflect on, and it'll be a great Jen and Millie for our listeners to reflect on, what do you define as a failure moment in your life? and what did you learn and grow from that? So looking back, when
That's
you
good.
hit the cone, did it feel like the most devastating moment ever?
No.
Oh, it didn't.
No.
See, I would have.
Because in my mind I thought, and pardon me, I thought this was stupid, right? Why am I learning how to do this? I'm never going to park this way. And so for me, my failure was qualified based on what I thought was necessary to know as a driver versus what the objective test meant,
The
right?
law says.
The law says, right? Which it isn't even the law to 90-degree back anywhere. I'm like,
Well, and I think it's so fascinating how much has changed about driver's licenses. So growing up, I was a farm kid, and there were very significant qualifications for a learner's permit, a school permit. So that let's qualify these. School permit is permission to drive to school when you are under the age of 16. A learner's permit is what you get when you can drive with a legal driver. You mean obviously parents. That's typically at 15, and then I believe it's called a temporary driver's license is what you get initially when you first turn 16, and then you have to have so much time before they give you your official one. Okay, I really don't even know. Let's just say that. I really don't even know. I'm talking about it from the perspective that I had and the perspective my kids had. Now, this is how much, we're going to talk about great generational differences. I had to take driver's ed. I did not have to pay for it. Driver's ed was part of our education. It was part of education. And I took driver's ed with my history teacher, Lonnie Schaefer, and my friends Jeremy and Travis were unfortunately part of my team. We were divided into groups of 3. So we took classroom instruction, which was basically like going up here to the safety council and learning coursework, and that happened over the course of a semester. And then you had driving practice. And Mr. Schaefer deserves every medal and award in the world because he not only did this with me, he did this with all of Exeter High School for I don't know how many years.
Oh my
Or
gosh.
junior high. Junior high kids.
Junior high. Oh
Junior
my
high Exeter kids. Oh, goodness. So I had no idea what I was doing. So I'm a farm kid, but my mom was very, very nervous and cautious. So I did not grow up running the tractor or driving the grain truck. I mean, even riding in the grain truck was a big, I had to get clearance from mom to do that. So I didn't have driving experience, and my mom had never let me. So my grandpa, who, bless him, again, one of the most phenomenal influences in my life, especially when I think back, Grandpa would sneak driving lessons in with me. And so he would come to pick me up for piano lessons or pick me up for whatever, and we would get outside of the driveway. We had a long driveway on the farm. We'd get outside the driveway, and he'd say, okay, let's switch. So my mom couldn't see. And I would get in the driver's seat, and I would drive 25, white-knuckled, freaking out. And we'd get to town, and then we'd get to the stop sign to get on the highway, and he'd be like, okay, switch. And then he'd pick me up from piano lessons, and we'd get to the first gravel road.
Oh my goodness.
And then we'd switch, when we got to the mailbox so that my mom wouldn't see. And that was my only driving experience. It was very, very limited. Wow. So I go through driver's ed, and I will never forget Travis and Jeremy and Mr. Schaefer and I kind of confused the gas for the brake.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh no.
Also, I failed parallel parking.
Really?
But he just let it be. So that was all you had to do was attend driver's ed.
And it was part of the normal class.
It was part of the normal class, and then you went to the courthouse and you were like, I'm 14, I live on the farm, and I'm going to be a driver now. That's all I remember. Maybe my parents had to fill stuff out. They probably did. But I started driving at 14.
Wow.
So I don't even know if any of you can imagine what 14-year-old me was like, but that was serious level woo. It was one big party all the time. So as soon as I got the opportunity to drive, it was straight up freedom. So a school permit, when you live on the farm or you live far enough away from the school, means you only have driving privileges to and from school. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, in Exeter, you could cruise Maine. So to make this make sense, I know, Tess, and I'm so grateful for my Exeter listeners, and I hope you guys, maybe you could send pictures or
Please help me give me
maybe
context.
there's a video somewhere. But you would go, so the main street is essentially from the railroad tracks to the swimming pool. And that would be probably about 6 6 to 8 blocks maybe. And I know I'm really bad with distance and numbers, so Exeter friends, you can tell me I'm wrong. But no stoplights in town, but that you crossed a highway. So you'd have to go to the stop sign, go across, and you would pull a U-turn. You would drive to the railroad tracks, pull a U-turn, drive all the way, stop at the stop sign at the highway, cross the highway, go to the swimming pool, pull a UE, and you just do that on rotation to see who was around.
Oh my god!
And that's how you found out what was going on. And you'd stop at the old Texaco station, or you'd stop at the bullpen and talk with your friends. And there were no phones. There were no phones.
Yep.
You had to interact.
Cruise Maine.
You would cruise Maine. So guess what I did as soon as I possibly could?
Cruise in Maine.
Cruise in Maine. Well, I got picked up more than once by the town. We had a town police officer. His name was Officer Callahan, and
One police officer. In
only
town.
one, and we don't even have one now. So he would pull me over and say, "Allison, are you at a school event?" And I was like, "Yeah,
I'm coming home from school.
I'm going to Friends of Vocal, or I'm selling magazines or whatever." You can't do that. So he gave me gazillion warnings, but also my parents watched the mileage.
Oh no.
And yeah, a young Allison Wu was just, driving wasn't just a privilege and a right. It was my
It was your get out of
it was my out. It was my, I gotta be around people. I gotta get to
Heck
parties.
yeah.
So that's when I started driving. I was not allowed to take my siblings, hardly at all, because my mom insisted they ride the bus because my mom didn't trust me.
Good reason.
But I do have one situation where I was driving my little baby sister home. She wasn't a baby at the time, but I was driving Meredith home, and we lived 3 miles out of town, so gravel. And it had rained a lot, and I was driving slow, but I just lost. It just started to just go, and I was driving so slow that it was the most slow motion going in the ditch you can even imagine. If this would be a movie, it would be as if it was in slow motion. And I put my hand out, and I was like, "Meredith, Rudy," and we just slowly went in the ditch. And Rudy was just like completely unamused. Yeah, I think she would have been. So if I was 14, 15, she would have been 5. And she was just, whatever. And I was bawling. I was hysterical. And our neighbor Linus, pulled up. And he was like, "Are you in the ditch?" And I was like, "Clearly." And so he had to drive me and Rudy home. And I'd tell my parents that was terrible. I did see driving as a right. That was the first thing my parents took away from me. So when I got in trouble, I would lose my keys. And I was very rebellious. So when I would lose my keys, I would figure out where the keys were. And then when they got exhausted from that, they started unplugging my spark plugs so that I wouldn't sneak out and drive away with my car. To this day, if there is a Dodge vehicle that has a spark plug issue, I can tell you. I can hear it. I know it because I learned how to reset the spark plugs. I had a Dodge.
Kelly, you're
Oh,
such a rebel.
I was
love
big
it.
time rebel, and now it's funny because I go to sleep at 9:30, and I like rules.
I like girls.
But I had a Dodge 600 sedan. It was white. It was a 4-door. I don't even know that I could find them anywhere anymore, but it was a hilarious vehicle for me to have. And when I think about how I saw driving, I just didn't want to ride the bus anymore.
Yeah.
So when my parents would take my keys away, they would force me to ride the bus with my younger siblings. So I was a senior in high school. It was May, and I got in big trouble, and I lost my car privileges. And my mom said, just put the keys on the table. And she made me ride the bus as a senior in high school to school with my baby sister on a Monday after graduation. And I was mortified.
Oh
and I remember the bus drivers I had over the years, they were just like, "Oh, well, what happened now?
Lost her privileges again.
What'd you do this time?" So now when I think about when I started driving, I was so excited about it. And now I think about driving, and sometimes it's exhausting. And then I think about distracted driving.
Yeah.
And I did not have nearly the kind of distraction in my vehicle, in my 1988 Dodge sedan, that today I have. So this is a good question for our listeners to ponder, and I hope they respond to us with, when did you start driving? Did you see it as a privilege? What was your first vehicle? And were you involved in any bending of the rules?
I love that.
Today's generation, what we're hearing is that they're less likely to sign up right away for a driver's license. So why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a little bit the iGen book that Terry has mentioned. We have to read the books we reference, right? I'm going to reference it. I haven't even opened the book yet. But she mentioned, Terry was awesome. She explained the book, and she said one of the greatest needs of this generation, right, one of the greatest motivators of this generation is the need for safety. With lockdown drills, active shooter drills, with worries about going to the movie theater, going to school, going to houses of worship, right? There is so much more fear latent in everyday events, right? In everyday places. And so she mentioned that kind of the need to feel safe is one of the greatest motivators of this generation. And so I think that definitely, I think about the number of car wrecks there are, car crashes, and the number of deaths that result as that. I think about the fact that when so I think part of that is the need to feel safe, right? Not wanting to have that on you, wanting to be driven around. I think overall there is a trending of adulthood coming later and later in life, right? And we talk about that a lot in terms of the young adult population. And I actually was talking with my pastor who's in a kind of a young adult ministry class right now, and there's essentially a new growth cycle period that they're literally inserting and will never remove from the growth development, human development cycle in research. And it's called the emerging adulthood. And it's people in their 20s all the way to sometimes early 30s where it's haven't gotten married, haven't settled, haven't maybe done some of the things that 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago you would have done around mid-20s, late 20s, right? Moving to totally up and moving for a job, traveling for extended long periods of time, quitting a job, things like that, that there's this period of life where there's a little bit of exploration and definition, right, that never has been there before. And he said there are like 5 factors to it, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what they are, but I think that adulthood is coming later and later, right? And so there's this need and this desire, I think, at least if I were to put myself in the shoes of a 14, 15, 16-year-old right now in this current, the current world that we live in, I would want to feel safe as long as possible, right? I would want to abdicate responsibility as long as possible because I know responsibility or that kind of thing is coming, right? And so I think it might have a couple of things to do maybe with those would be a little bit of what I would hypothesize.
That makes me think of, you'll remember from Summit, a couple years ago when we listened to Jim Clifton's message about the difference in generations when he was graduating from college, what his goals were and how different those goals are now today for a millennial. The other thing it makes me think about is how we're seeing deliberative often in high school students, and you and I we really noticed that.
Yeah. It's so much more frequent. It's like overall, before like the youngest generation has taken StrengthsFinder, right? If you look at frequencies, 5 years ago, deliberative was in the bottom 5 in terms of the most frequent strengths to appear within someone's top 5. And I bet you we see
it all the time.
More than one kid, for sure, at every place that we go to that has high deliberative. It's been so surprising, I think, for both of us. We've been trying to figure out why we're seeing it so much.
And I think one of the things that makes sense to me, or I guess now that I've pondered it more, initially I thought, no way, not deliberative, because this is the quick connect. Quick, I get what I need. I've got social media. I can look up whatever on Google. I'm constantly fed by and feeding this quick reaction machine.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's fair, because I don't think, I was assuming no way deliberative because, I hate to use the language, but kids aren't thinking about what they put out on social media. That's not a risk to them. That's not where they see risk or decision making. They see risk and decision making in the things that we see as rights.
Yeah.
They see driving as this enormous task that encompasses some risk. And we just see it as like, I got to do that, and I want to do that, and I need to get from here to there, and I don't want to wait on anybody, or I don't want, it seems like freedom to us. I think to my generation, it seemed like freedom. So I think it's really interesting when we think about deliberative showing up and what deliberative would mean to them. I don't think that they would use what I post on social media as an example.
I think that's interesting because I think that if you, and I would wonder, and I would love to talk to somebody, you know, of this next generation, maybe I'll pick my mentee's brain when I see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because I think there's been a lot of just a kind of thought lines about the difference between I will post this on social media versus I will tell you this in person. And the risk of the relationship, right?
Yes.
And speaking out what I might post on your wall or IM you, right? Or direct message you, you know, on whatever platform, that seems less risky because I don't see your reaction, right? There is a layer, a barrier between us. There isn't the intimacy, right? Versus if I were to tell you the same thing I would write in person.
Right.
That seems, and when I put that into context, that makes total sense, right?
That completely honors deliberative.
Because that's so much more of a risk.
Right. So, you know, we often talk about the chicken egg, the what's nature, what's nurture. I had a great conversation with my daughter about this this weekend because I went to help her clean her condo.
Oh no.
And I said, just by osmosis, just by simple DNA, do you not have the same kind of, like, I am so, everything has to be so clean for me.
Yeah.
It's just a need. And she said, no, because you did it. She said, you literally did it. Like, we didn't have to think about cleaning our rooms because you were doing it. And I remember this triggered a memory for me very early on when I was first learning about strengths, and I did some work with my friend Monica and her daughter McCall. And McCall has organizer as one of her Strengths Explorer themes. And her mom, I remember Monica saying, what? You know, like, she is not organized, and her stuff's all over the place, and I have to take care of all this stuff, and her room's a mess, and she doesn't know where she's going. And McCall said, because you do it. I don't have to. But I use that strength when I'm at school, and I use that strength on my own. And so it made me really think again about our nature nurture, but also this chicken egg. So have we brought this generation to deliberative? Or have they encompassed deliberative in a more meaningful way to them than what we see deliberative? We talk about this a lot. Deliberative, I see Brandon. I see him taking his hands off of the computer and pondering and thinking. That is, I think, you know, we talk about strengths envy, but we need to come up with a phrase for strengths labeling that's not labeling, but when we hear a strength that we immediately think of the person.
Yeah.
Because I hear belief and immediately I think of
like
Annette.
an association, right?
It is.
A strengths association.
Right. It's like say a word and which we also should do on Agenda and Elise sometime with option to edit.
We should do that. Word association games.
I think it'd be great to bring on a guest.
Yes.
And we have the list of words, and then we can just do a prediction of what we think they're going to say.
I think they're going to say
related to their strengths.
Genius. Genius.
Oh.
Okay, who's our first victim?
Yeah, offer yourself.
Yeah, offer yourself.
So I think these are great things to ponder.
Yeah.
We also, not just with driving, you know, I think we need to think thoughtfully about, for those of you that can't see what's happening in real life, real time here, Tess has an evil eye that she gives people. I grew up with one of my friend's moms.
That wasn't what I was doing.
One of my friend's moms had an evil eye that you did not want to receive.
Oh, for sure.
You have one?
I have one for sure. That was not what I was giving. I was actually more so curious. My adaptability was like, there's someone here that isn't normally here. What is it about? Who is it? Should I go meet them?
Well, there's a little bit of woo there.
A little bit. It pops up.
Yeah.
It's more my individualization, the curiosity, rather than the excitement to meet someone. It's a curiosity about their story.
I thought you were giving the evil eye, to sound. Can't wait to hear how sound works in our new digs.
There is no quiet space around here. Nothing that's fully quiet around here. That's hard.
I noticed you're in your headphones quite a bit.
Like all the time. Because I'm in the center of the entire space.
So I think if I put headphones in, it has to be white noise or my yoga Pandora. Because I cannot listen. I'm learning this about myself. I cannot listen to a podcast and do other things. Even walking.
What?
I can't. I get so into whatever it is that I'm like, I could trip, I could fall. I've been listening to,
Oh my gosh.
little side note. I know I'm always talking about Maria Shriver, and I apologize, but not really. Her podcast is great, and she interviewed Chelsea Handler, who I'm not even a fan of. And it was so good. We're going to talk about it when we talk about failures and we talk about resilience, and I'm going to make you listen to this.
Okay.
It was one of the best things I have listened to and the most startling. It is a get real with yourself, like wake up.
Wow.
You can keep blaming this on everybody else, but you better take a long look in the mirror.
Wow.
And it was startling. And I've been doing a lot of reflection on, I don't want to call it where I fail, but where I don't see. And I can be everything that I can be the opposite of everything that I say I am, real quick. I can be mean, I can be judgmental, I can be completely in fixed mindset, I can be completely in weakness mindset. I think I'm going to spend some time getting really real about that. And learning about myself. And Chelsea went on a year discovery. And it was related to grief and trauma. And I think part of the reason I love that so much was our last Mentor Academy was on trauma, provided by Jessica Croker from Project Harmony. It was a really good academy. And just great awareness that we're kind of all walking around with trauma, but we get to decide what level it is. So I would encourage people to take the ACE quiz. I would encourage you to go, there's a resilience quiz. And I took it and thought, okay, I'm super resilient. But it's because I had all of these people in my life.
Yeah.
It's not like I just stood up one day and said, I am resilient. It's the people that you have in your life that help build you up when you fall. So teaser for the next one, because it's way too
much.
Way too much.
Here. Yeah. So I love the questions about driving. I
Yes.
think, like, when did you first drive? What was your first car?
Did you see it as a
bend the rules?
privilege?
Do you see it as a privilege? And then I want to add another one that I think will help us maybe focus on strengths and our generational differences. But what for you, and it goes along with that, but what would you define as risk? And why?
Oh.
What would you define as risky? Like, what's the most risky thing you've done in the last year? And what did it involve? So was it a conversation you had to have with someone? Was it skydiving? Like, I think that can look very different in terms of what someone would define as risk. So a hard conversation might not be something that I define as risk, because I know I have low harmony and I have to, that conversation has to happen. I've had to have a lot of hard conversations recently. But for someone else that might have really high harmony, that might have high empathy, might say, gosh, I had to have a really difficult conversation with someone the other day. They might define that as risk. And so I'd love to hear about that, maybe what you define as risk, or what's been the most risky thing you've done recently. And then
Keep it clean. Keep it clean, listener.
Keep it clean, please. Yeah, that was assumed, but thank you for that qualifier. That comes from the person who took was a rebel, and versus the person who posed the question, who is such a rule follower. It's a bit scary. I'm like, gosh, Ellie, you were so cool, and I'm like, I was so boring. Oh my gosh!
Look how the tables have turned. Look what you can expect at 39.
Oh man, I'm gonna be turned into such a rebel. Oh man, this hasn't happened yet, but okay. Anyway, but
Yes, you are, actually.
a little bit
You are.
in spirit.
Your definition of rebel.
Rebel.
Your definition of rebel is very much influenced by your strengths.
How so?
You are a rebel when it comes to the way things have always gone.
Oh, for sure.
You are a rebel in the way that you approach faith and philosophy, and you are a rebel, and it's built on your strength set. rebellion is based on my strength set.
Interesting. You're right.
Yeah.
I would challenge the status quo because that
Right.
drives me
You would
nuts.
challenge an established author, philosopher.
I do most of the time.
I know, because I mean, think about your learner and your context and your individualization. My rebellion is based on woo,
Yeah.
big time.
Interesting.
Oh goodness!
Ooh,
So that's
gosh,
a great
such
question.
a good. Ooh. What does okay? So what's a risky thing you've done recently, and how do your strengths play into that, and maybe how does your generation play into that, and then what does your form of rebellion look like
Based on your strengths.
based on your strengths?
Wow.
Man, did we just go? Those are good questions. Look what happens when we don't
how
plan
I'm
anything.
telling you what I say at the beginning. Episode 39, brilliance.
No, you said fabulous.
But I said brilliance
You
in there
did say-
too,
you
I
did
think.
say
Because
brilliance.
that's what happens when you turn 39.
You turned 39. Something I'll have to look forward to in 14 years.
These are great questions. I hope our listeners will give it a go. We're going to add some things to our worth mentioning board. Some emerging adult. I think
Content.
information would be great.
Yep.
The
The-
Jim Clifton article reference. I think we've added that before.
I think we should add the resilience quiz and a link to the Vimeo page with the mentor. It's also on the mentor resource library. Maybe we can link the MRL,
Yeah.
but we could probably also link directly the video of that. It was a great, as a mentor, it was an awesome mentor academy to sit in on
Nice.
and listen.
And it'll give us kind of a precursor to our next session when we talk a little bit about failure and we talk about resilience. I also think that we should share pictures of our first vehicles.
I have a picture of me in my first vehicle.
Boy, I hope I
Yeah,
do, but I
gosh.
don't think I do.
Gosh.
I think I've destroyed it on purpose.
Oh, shoot.
But you know what? I have a picture of an ex-boyfriend.
Oh no.
I know I have that. Now, let's just talk about how sad that is. Yes, totally based on rebellion.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, I was told not to date him. And I
So
have a
dated.
picture of him in my vehicle.
Yes.
Do you know how we
Yes.
took pictures back then? With a camera that would then be developed. And do you know who would develop my pictures?
Your
My mother.
parents?
She would take him to friend to the pharmacy and have them developed.
Oh my god.
Wow, I was
That was
just
that's such a bold move.
I was constantly rebelling. Oh, Mom,
my
I'm so
gosh.
sorry.
Oh.
Oh.
Bless your mother's heart. Jeez Louise, that is a bold move.
Oh, it was
Take a picture that your mom would develop.
yeah, of him in the passenger seat of my car.
Oh my gosh.
Like, oh yeah, tell me not to see
Oh,
somebody.
man.
Take a look at
I
this.
love that.
Wow,
Oh
that's
my gosh.
can't believe I just admitted that.
Okay. Anyway,
Anyway,
risk and rebellion.
risk and rebellion. We've
We'd
had a
love to
good
hear-
session today.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this episode number 39. 39 Flirty and Thriving. How about that? Of Jen and Millie. We are new to the podcasting world, so tell people about it. Ask them these questions and tell them where you heard about them. We will trademark because I think these are great self-development questions. So, no, just kidding. But tell people about us. We'd love to spread the word and to engage more people in this conversation. To interact with us and to share your responses and your musings to the question that we posed. You can do that one of two ways. Follow us on Jen and Millie. That's the best way to find us on Instagram at Jen and Millie at GENNANDMILLIE. Or if you're interacting with us as a part of Teammates, you can always email Allie or I directly in a response to this episode that we'll send out. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next time.